And let you know that we are going to be getting started momentarily in about 3 minutes. So thanks for being here. And it looks like we're live streaming, Ben. Okay,
Yep,
great.
we are live.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for being here and available for the meeting today with Puget Sound Energy. We are live streaming on YouTube and recording today's meeting, and we'll go ahead and get started in 3 minutes. So just hang tight while we wait for people to arrive. All right. Well, we are at the top of the 1 o'clock hour, so I will go ahead and get us started. Just a reminder that we are recording today's meeting. It's also live streaming on YouTube for folks that want to join there. Just want to say hello and welcome. We're really glad to just have you as at part of the March Puget Sound Energy Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting. We are going to be facilitating this today through Triangle Associates. Again, my name is Annie Kilberg Smith, and we'll be facilitating today with my colleague, Ben Relampagos. We're excited to have you join us and just also want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to be here with us. We've got a packed 2 hours, so just want to make sure that we move along in an efficient way. And just ask for folks if you are speaking or come off mute and you'd like to share your video, that's always helpful for folks. We've heard that it's nice to get to know people's faces as well as voices. So I also know this is right after the lunch hour. So if you'd prefer to stay off video, that's okay too, but would love to see your faces. And then while I go over the next few slides, I'm going to go ahead and just ask RPAG members to introduce themselves in the chat. Please go ahead and just share your name, your organization, and anything you're looking forward to today. And Ben, if you could put that prompt in the chat, we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Jack. Okay, so a few quick Zoom reminders here. Zoom has made several updates lately. So just if you can't find something, just take a little deeper look around or ask Ben. But just want to let you know that the chat function will be on for RPAG members and PSE staff during the meeting. I'll be keeping an eye on it and reading questions out loud so presenters can stay focused on the content. If you'd like to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand. Let us know in the chat or just take yourself off mute if you're only joining us via audio and just let me know you want to chime in and I'll get you in the queue. I'm going to go ahead and call on people in the order received just to keep things organized. And I also wanted to note that you can go ahead and use the show captions feature if you'd like, as well as have it translated into other languages if that's helpful for you. If you need help with that tool, please just let Ben know. He's happy to help you. And then the Q&A tool is going to be turned off for today's webinar format. For public attendees, I see we have a couple of those, so thank you for being here today. Right now, you won't be able to chat or raise your hand, but later in the meeting towards the end, we'll go ahead and enable that for you. If you have any public comment, we'll ask you to raise your hand and then move into the video space so people can see your faces and hear your voice. And then just one last reminder about the live stream and recording today in case you just joined, we are recording today's meeting. Next slide. All right, so some facilitator requests. We're just going to ask that we keep conversations constructive, and respectful. I'll be here to just help us guide through that. If you use acronyms, which we know there are many, or technical terms, please go ahead and just give an explanation or spell those out for folks so folks can follow along if they're not familiar with it. And then if something's outside of the scope of today's discussion, we're just going to ask that you hold that and go ahead and put it in the feedback form or email PSE at isp@pse.com, and Ben can put that in the chat for you. And then last heads up about the public comment, that's going to come at the end of today's meeting after the presentations. And so we'll get to you at the last 15 minutes of today's meeting. Next slide. A quick safety moment here. So today we're focusing on safe yard work and gardening for the spring. So if you're anything like me, I've been really honing in on these bluebird days in the sunshine the last week or weekend, and had myself in the dirt, making things looking refreshed and nice. But also good reminders here are to just make sure that if you're using a ladder, to use 3 contacts. We don't want any slip and falls. And make sure you're using eye protection when you're operating a mower or weed eater, and also wear slip-resistant shoes. And if you are digging, please go ahead and use tools in the dirt, not your hands, just in case you never know what you're going to find. Okay, next slide. So today's speakers, we have Kara Durbin, Director of Clean Energy Strategy at PSE, and then several other folks from PSE today. We've got Brian Tyson, Manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation, Stephanie Price, Lead with Electric Load Forecasting and Analysis, Chandita Das, Lead with Gas Load Forecasting and Analysis, and Lauren Molinder, Manager of Load Forecasting and Analysis. So just want to say thank you to all of you in advance for walking us through today's materials, and then also being available and willing to respond and engage with the RPAG members. And then just in addition to the speakers, we also have, of course, all of these amazing RPAG members. So thank you for starting to introduce yourself in the chat, as well as lots of PSE colleagues online to answer questions if needed, and also the public joining us from an observation mode today. And again, if you just joined us, you're a part of the RPAG, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you haven't already, it's always helpful to see who's in the room. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and move into the agenda. Next slide, please. And today we have 2 main discussion topics. First, we're going to continue the cost test conversation, and then we're going to shift to the updated demand forecasts. Both are continuations of discussions from previous meetings. We've planned most of the meeting for presentation and discussion. We're going to leave time at the end for next steps and public comment. As always, we want to just ask that you feel free to ask clarifying questions as we go. And ask that if we want to hold deeper conversations, we create the space to be able to do that at the end of each of the presentation pieces. And then as a heads up, you've noticed probably in the past couple meetings, we've done some round robin formats. Round robin is just a facilitator's term for going around to each of the RPAG members and hearing from you if we haven't heard from you. So we might do that if we're not getting a lot of discussion, or we feel like we really want to be able to hear from everyone on a certain topic. So just want to give you a heads up on that. And then once we get to the end, we'll of course complete the next steps, which we've got a few end of meeting slides that we always cover, as well as offer a time for public comment. Okay, next slide. So in terms of the meeting purpose, the goal today is really to build on those previous conversations rather than starting anything new. We've had some pretty in-depth conversations over in the February and July timeframe that we're building off of, and we want to just continue the cost test discussion from last month, as well as look at updated demand forecast assumptions since the last time this group saw them. So we'll also spend some time on load scenarios, especially related to let's see. Also the forecast assumptions since the July meeting. And then today is mostly about just getting your input and reactions so the team can refine as they go forward. Next slide. And then as usual, today just works best when this is a discussion, not just a presentation. So if we can get you all to engage and interact with PSE, we're just going to be encouraging to do that throughout the meeting, which I know can be hard in webinars. But we're especially interested in hearing where things may not make sense, or if you have an alternative to suggest rather than what you're hearing or seeing that PSE is presenting. So we'll make space for that. And then if something feels unclear or incomplete, you all have been really good about just flagging that for us. So please feel free to keep doing that. We want to make sure this makes sense for all of you. And if we need to pause to do that, we're happy to do so. Great. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. I'll just pause and see if there's any questions from the RPAG members about the agenda, objectives, what we need from you today. And I see lots of people introducing themselves in the chat, so that's great. And just a reminder to your names on the participant list, if you don't mind just adding your affiliation there too, that's always super helpful. You just go over your name, click on the three dots, and click rename and add it there. That's always nice to know as we're flipping through folks to call on, especially like when it comes to the round robin. Okay. So it looks like we don't have any questions, so we can go ahead and segue into the first portion of our meeting. So I'll introduce and hand it over to Kara Durbin and Brian Tyson to talk about advancing definitions of the societal impacts in the cost test.
Great. Thank you, Annie. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Good afternoon, everyone. I think Annie's already teed up sort of what the objective is for today, but just to re-emphasize, we're really looking to continue the conversation that we began with all of you last month on sort of how we define these different elements that are outlined in the cost test rules, and sort of build upon areas where we heard feedback, but perhaps we can unpack some of those ideas a little bit further. We also want to share with you just really what we've heard so far, not just from the RPAG. We'll recap some of the themes from last month's meeting, but we also want to share with you what we heard from our Equity Advisory Group when we took this conversation to them, as well as the Conservation Resource Advisory Group, which was as recent as yesterday. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'll just we'll dive right in. I'm going to start things off and recap some of what we heard, and then Brian will take over partway through and start taking us through some of the updates and the discussion around reliability, resiliency, and security of supply. Oh, Leslie, I see your hands up already.
Yeah,
I decided, sorry, this is a quick question as we get started. I've been sitting more on this question, and I'm hoping PSC, as we talk about each of the impacts, can share more about who the impacts are going towards, whether it's from a customer perspective, utilities perspective, society's perspective, Equity impacts, obviously, those are going to be more specific towards priority populations. Other impacts are going to be felt more on the utility side of things. So I think if you're able to, share more about the perspective of the impact, I think that would help guide the conversations a little bit. So thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Wesley. Appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage you to the extent that staff or others here have specific ideas around which impacts to them seem the most appropriate to be considering at the portfolio level, we'd welcome that feedback too. We are still very much reflecting on your feedback from last month and where the conversation is so far and where we think we can take some of these impacts as we think about this first ISP. So thanks for that, Wesley. We'll see what we can do as we go and invite that conversation as well. So on this slide, we're attempting to just recap some of the major themes that we heard from our February conversation. This is in no way exhaustive, but just really trying to rise to the top. What were some of the major themes we heard, and how are we thinking about that in response? So a very natural question that came up, of course, is really, just getting right to the heart of it, right? How is this cost test and decision framework going to work in application? And so we really felt, though, that we needed to start the conversation with the first step, which is really defining what these elements are, understanding what we're measuring, and then we can start to think about, okay, how do those different elements, whether they're monetized in the cost test, whether they're quantitative or they're qualitative, and they're a part of the broader decision-making framework, how does that all come together as we work towards a preferred portfolio? So we're definitely thinking about that. As we suggested last time, we'd love your ideas around how the decision framework might be applied at a portfolio level. Because this is brand new, but we have some ideas. And then sort of the other part of this is, of course, we will get there. We will be back to talk to you when we get closer to the summer around, okay, here's where we're trending on some of the definitions, the impacts, what we're measuring. Now here's how we're thinking it will be applied in a broader decision framework. So that conversation is coming, and we appreciate and understand the question coming up now. We also heard it at the Conservation Resource Advisory Group yesterday. It's a completely reasonable question to be asking. Similarly, how will qualitative elements be evaluated next to monetized and quantitative elements? We know that they all need to be considered together. The monetized elements, of course, are in that narrow cost test itself. So again, that's to be determined, more to come on that, but it's an excellent question, and it's one we're definitely going to need to continue to wrestle with. Now, one major theme we heard coming out of the February meeting was a lot of interest and questions around, how do we quantify reliability versus resiliency versus risk at a portfolio level? What are we measuring? Are we measuring overlapping considerations? And so this is an area that Brian and I want to tee up for further conversation. There have been a couple of tools suggested to us already that we're looking at, but we just want to spend some more time today getting your thoughts and ideas there. And then we also heard themes around how do you consider the stability of the supply, the volatility that might be experienced, and the value of resource diversity. So that's another theme for us to consider during part of that conversation. And then another area we had conversation around last time was really around the risk reduction premium element. And so I'll touch on that briefly in a couple of slides, and Brian will as well, just in how we're thinking there's an element there that we can measure in a monetized way. So we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. Okay, Annie, I think we can go to the next slide. I think my next slide is recapping what we've heard. Great. Okay, so we last saw you in February. Since then, we visited the Equity Advisory Group on March 16th, and then the CRAG, or the Conservation Resource Advisory Group, yesterday. So I just want to recap for your general awareness kind of what we heard from those advisory groups at a high level, just to kind of inform your thinking and make you aware of what the conversations we're having here and also the conversations we're hearing from our other advisory groups. So with the Equity Advisory Group, we went into that conversation. We gave them we both encouraged them to look at the RPAG materials and to watch the presentation that and the conversation we all had last month. We encouraged them to do that. We also gave them a high-level overview of all of the different cost test elements and how we were preliminarily thinking about categorizing them. And then we specifically teed up economic development and equity impacts as two areas that we thought, the EAG really has some special expertise in those areas where we'd really like to have further discussion and see what ideas they have for what we should be measuring. So we did breakout groups for economic development, equity impacts, had some pretty rich discussions in both rooms. Brian was participating in the economic development breakout room along with others, and I was in the equity impacts room. And what we generally heard was some general support for kind of our proposed approach for how we might measure both economic development and equity, but a consistent theme we heard from them was just to continue to remember that the importance of considering equity throughout the process, and then it's interconnected in the work that we do. And so we need to consider it each stage, not just have one box that is equity, check it, and it's done. And that's been a consistent theme that we've definitely heard from the EAG in our work with them. Specific to economic development, we heard from several members that they'd really like us to go beyond just job counts and really start to reflect more on, are the things we can measure, tease out around job quality, around the duration of the jobs, where they're distributed, and the longevity of those roles as things that would be important for us to consider. At the same time, they did note that, we may not have the right tools or metrics to be able to accurately forecast and predict all of those things right now, but they really just wanted to share with us, like, in an ideal world, these were the kinds of things that you'd be able to measure. And if we can't nail those things down for this ISP, we can certainly keep it on our aspirational list for future ISPs. And then in the equity breakout session, and then we also regrouped and shared what we heard a little bit before the meeting closed. We heard some pretty clear direction and support for focusing on reducing energy burden, particularly for our low-income customers. We talked a little bit about in that room about the 30% minimum designation and deepest need requirements that PSE had from the 2021 CEIP. And so while the EAG noted that those kinds of programmatic approaches to distributional equity have value, what I sensed from the conversation was they really just felt that reducing energy burn was the most critical thing that we could put our attention on and focus on. And so we took that feedback coming out of that conversation. So that's just a high flyover of the EAG conversation. With the Conservation Resource Advisory Group yesterday, they raised a lot of the same questions that many of you asked last time. They wanted to understand, of course, how the decision framework's going to work with the qualitative elements versus the monetized and quantitative elements. They wanted to understand, have us think more about the benefits side of things and not just the costs. And also, of course, understanding how monetized elements versus qualitative elements would be weighted and considered in the overall decision-making framework, which are great questions. And as I said previously, we will get to that. We will get to that point as we continue to develop this work. With the CRAG, we focus specifically on, given their expertise, on wanting to hear more about host customer impacts. And so one of the things, so we came to them with a proposal, you may recall, to measure the direct customer costs from installation of a particular measure. So let's say a heat pump, the cost that the customer incurred to purchase and have installed that heat pump, as just one example. And coming from an energy efficiency lens, they asked some really interesting questions and said, well, why aren't we really, instead of the total cost, why aren't we using the incremental cost? Assuming that the measure is purchased upon burnout, then that's kind of how the analysis typically works in a energy efficiency context. So we heard the theme of incremental cost as maybe being more appropriate to measure in that space. We also heard feedback around, well, it feels like you're focusing on the cost part, but what about the host customer benefits? So what about any rate impacts that may be associated with converting from gas to electric as a benefit? Where's that being captured? Also, another theme we heard was, what about the cost to those that don't participate in those programs that may still be remaining as gas customers or as electric customers? So, we heard in the CRAG, it was a really interesting and good conversation around, okay, how do we look at both benefits and impacts? And in some cases, I think we have more work on our side at PSE to think more about, well, where does some of those benefits naturally already get assessed or evaluated in our modeling work, and where does the cost test or the decision framework need to consider some benefits that maybe aren't a part of the initial analysis that we're doing. So that's something that we'll need to take a closer look at. So that was a pretty quick flyover of what we've heard from the advisor groups. If there aren't any questions, but I think I see a hand up, Annie, so maybe I'll pause here.
Yeah, we can pause quickly. Yeah. Quinn, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Kara.
Hi, Quinn.
I am not seeing some of the other things that kind of go into the cost test on the agenda for this meeting, like other environmental impacts. So are those kind of baked at this point, or or will we have time to weigh in on them today or later in the process?
And Kara, I don't know if you're talking. Oh, yeah, you
Oh,
are. Sorry, you cut out for
am
a
I
minute.
having an audio issue again? Okay.
Yeah.
That happened last time. I have a headset, so hold on just a second. We'll just see if this is a approach. Hold
Okay.
on. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Maybe that will be better. I can hope. So Quinn, to your question, for today's discussion, we thought we would focus on both bringing you what we've heard, some updates that we're contemplating making as compared to last time, and really hope to have a more robust discussion around reliability, resiliency, and security supply. We're happy to take feedback on the other elements. We'll go to the color-coded map in a minute. So if there's specific feedback that you or other RPAG members have, we'd welcome it there. There's the feedback report process. We welcome that there too. We're still very much considering what metrics and information we have available. We don't have all year to work on this, unfortunately. Maybe we really do need to move this work forward and get to the decision framework by early summer, I would say, but we've still got a little time. So if there are ideas and feedback, we'd very much welcome them. We're still continuing to consider our process. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. Great. And yes, Wesley, did you have a follow-up to that?
Not a follow-up, a separate question. So in your overview, I thought it was a good overview, so thank you for providing that. I'm wondering if PSC is going to consider looking at bill impacts as a component of the cost test, and if you heard any desire to consider bills and the conversations around energy affordability with the AG. Because as a component of one of the benefits of installing an efficient heat pump, right, there's going to be costs associated with that. They're expensive, but you're also going to see customer bills going down for those participants. And that would address energy affordability concerns for those that are participating. So yeah, wondering if you're considering that and if you've heard anything along those lines from the AG. I know it was mentioned yesterday at the CRAG, but trying to connect the advisory groups.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Wesley. Brian, I don't know if you have a perspective from the EAG to the last part of Wesley's question. I think, at a portfolio, I mean, more broadly, the work that we're going to do for the cost test and for the overall ISP is absolutely going to consider bill impacts of whatever scenario that we're moving forward with, or the portfolio itself. But the kind of, the granularness to your question, I'm not entirely sure if we're going to be at the level that you're thinking, but let's talk about that a little bit more. I want to understand how you're thinking that sort of works in application, but we are very much wanting to make sure that bill impacts are an important consideration as part of this ISP. And we definitely heard the affordability theme coming through from the EAG, and it's on our minds as well as we embark on this ISP. So hopefully that helps a little bit, and let's be sure to continue that conversation.
Thanks, Kara. And I think, Kara, you were about to, did you want to hear from Brian on that, or did you want to maybe dive into the next set of slides?
Brian, maybe I'll go on the next set of slides.
Go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, is that good? Or do you,
Yep.
okay,
No, go
let's
ahead.
do that. All right, let's go to the next slide. So you'll probably recall this slide from our February conversation. We have made a couple of updates, which I'll highlight, just really based on what we've heard so far and feedback from our advisory groups and some adjustments that we think from where we started this conversation. You'll recall that I said, well, this is a starting point. It's preliminary. Well, we're making some adjustments now. We may make some further adjustments as we go, but I just want to highlight sort of where we currently are sitting from a categorization perspective, and then I'll hand it over to Brian to walk through those areas in detail and hopefully spur some more discussion. So under the risk reduction premium, we had this one categorized as orange originally. It was in the undetermined category. So we'll talk through that in a minute, but we've changed that one to green, so the monetized category. And we think there's something we can capture there in terms of the expected price that also may fit within the rule language that links this particular element to the Climate Commitment Act. The second area was, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, was in the economic development element. Based on where we are right now, the conversation we had with the EAG around some ideas on how we can measure this, we think this is something we can put in the quantitative measuring bucket and provide some data that can be a part of our consideration as we apply the decision framework. And then, as I mentioned before, it's for reliability, resiliency, and security of supply. Some ideas were brought forward at the last meeting. We had some discussion. We really just wanted to unpack those ideas a little bit further, see if any of you have other tools or metrics or ideas you want to bring to the conversation that we ought to consider. That felt like a theme that was worth spending a little bit more time on today. And then, as I indicated in response to Quinn or Wesley, happy to take feedback on any of these other elements at this point or before we wrap up this as agenda item, and then also the feedback report as a tool as well. Okay, Annie, if there aren't any hands up, which I can't totally tell, but if there aren't, then we'll go to the next slide and I'll hand it over to Brian.
You're good to go, Kara. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kara. Thank you all. Good to be here today. I wanted to go ahead and jump right into the risk reduction premium. As Kara mentioned, that's one that we went back and sort of updated what we had before, but essentially we think we have a proposed approach here. You can see we're really thinking about estimating the difference between the CCA ceiling price and the expected price in total dollars. So again, we're able to monetize this impact and be able to show that based on each scenario. And again, Kara mentioned that the CCA ceiling prices, it's really tied to what we see in the rules language itself. And so that's why we're leaning on this particular approach for the risk reduction premium. And I know there were we had some discussion at the last RPAG about other ways to think about risk and just wanted to clarify why we're leaning towards this approach for the risk reduction premium. Excuse me. So I'll pause here to see if anyone if that approach seems reasonable, or if there's any suggestions or alternatives that we should be thinking about. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Can you, and I apologize, Brian, if you've covered this already, but can you remind me where the expected price is coming from?
Oh, yeah, thanks for that question. That's a conversation I just had actually. So we're actually doing a bit of a forecast just to understand where we think that
Okay.
price may be. Yep.
And is that forecast, so that's a PSE generated forecast, it's not like a third party thing?
That's correct, but we're using other resources, and I don't have the resources in front of me right now, but we are using other resources to develop that process.
Okay, yeah, I'd be
see.
interested in knowing a little bit more about how that's derived. But I think in general, this makes some sense. If we could understand how like gas fuel prices are reflected in some way here, that would be good. Because I understand I mean, yeah, like the allowances are one thing, but I think there's also significant risk associated with just the fuel prices themselves and particularly with what we're seeing like geopolitically and LNG export plans out of BC. I think we just love to kind of dig in a little more and make sure we understand how that risk is being factored in.
For sure, Lauren. And before we get much further with that, Lauren, I wanted to just pause because I know Elizabeth from PSE can help with the former question. Elizabeth, did you want to chime in?
Sure, I can chime in. So for the question on the CCA price, so we're using a ceiling price, which is based off of what we're assuming for the calculation, what's been told from ecology, how the ceiling will work. And then for the mid price, we are assuming the link to California. And so the California Energy Commission recently put out a new forecast for the price. So we are using that forecasted price for the mid price.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. And I saw several other folks seconding that question in the chat. So hopefully that helps answer a lot of those folks in the chat. Eliza, or sorry, not Eliza, but Megan, Quinn, and Katie. Okay. Brian, was there anything else you wanted to respond to on that one?
No, no, I just saw Wesley's hand come up. Thank you,
Yeah.
Elizabeth, for jumping in, but I saw Wesley's hand come up. I don't know if Elizabeth, you might want to stay.
Perfect. Yeah. Wesley, what's your question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if PSC is considering modeling or looking at higher ceiling prices that align with state emission targets. There's an assumption that ecology might adaptively manage the ceiling price. So I'm wondering if PSC is considering that. Because presumably the ceiling price now might be different than it is 5 years out, 10 years out. And so I think having that reflected here is worth considering.
Thanks for that question, Leslie. At the moment, that is not a part of our plan to sort of adjust that ceiling price. I don't know if Elizabeth or others want to speak to that anymore.
Just note with the assumption to link to California, we did pull what was looking at the ceiling price for California as well. So our ceiling. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
sorry. Just noting that we did pull the California ceiling price as well. So our ceiling price is following along with what California is doing. So with that assumption for the link, we are following both price strips to see how they are comparing.
Okay.
Can you share a little bit more on how California's ceiling price compares to Washington's? I'm not familiar. Yeah.
They're very similar assumptions going with an inflation per year over time. You know what? Not diving into the details right now, but I think I'll take this back. And when we come back the next time, I'll have some more information on the CCA so we can walk through where those prices are coming from and how we're looking at those.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Sounds like there might be a lot of details to divulge there.
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like there's some thanks in the chat for that. Okay. Other questions that are coming up for folks?
Okay. All right. If not, thank you all. So let's go to the next slide on economic development. So as Kara mentioned, we went to the Equity Advisory Group, and we heard a little bit about this at the CRAG yesterday, but one of the things that EAG really focus on is not just the quantity of jobs, but also the types of jobs, the quality of jobs, the wages of jobs. Those sort of things were really front and center for many of the EAG members. And so right now our proposed approach is to use the JEDI model, which really focuses on estimating number of jobs based on a particular resource type. And so what it does is it takes in all of the information related to a particular, call it wind or geothermal or any of those types of resources into its model. And then what it spits out is an estimated number of jobs, whether it be construction or long-term jobs, or temporary versus permanent jobs, and gives us a bit of an output or write-up of what the job breakdown may look like. So one of the things that we discuss with the EAG is that because these are generic resources, it's really difficult to understand where the jobs may be, or even sometimes even the type of job. But I think what we think is this model does help provide some insight, at least, to the quantity of jobs that are out there. Okay, go ahead, Quinn.
Yeah, hi Brian. I know that the Jedi model also includes other economic development impacts, like local revenue and supply chain. And so I kind of think if you're going to use it, it seems like you have just by myopically focusing in on jobs, you like
Mhm.
leave a lot of output on the table that you could be potentially using.
Okay. Thank you for that, Quinn. Uh, that is there. I would agree that that is there, and so it sounds like it would be helpful for you and RPAG members to see something beyond the jobs, just because the model can produce that. Okay. Thanks, Quinn.
We've got a couple more
Oh,
hands up.
yeah, yeah.
So if that's okay, I'll go to Katie next
Sure.
and Lauren after that. Katie.
Thanks. Yes, Katie for Renewable Northwest. I'm curious how the output from the Jedi model informs the decision making. Specifically, like, would a higher job count be selected over a lower cost portfolio, for example?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Katie. And that's very similar to the discussion I think we have with this group and have had with other groups, which is, how do these different criteria really fit into the overall decision? Uh, we're not sure quite yet. Well, that's something we're still developing and still working on. And right now, we really want to focus on getting sort of these specific elements and impacts defined. But as we move forward, as we've said before, we will come back and continue to have discussion on the finality of that decision-making process and what gets used to make that final decision. So stay tuned. Thank you, Katie, for that question. Stay tuned, but we'll definitely come back and hopefully explore more about how these elements may impact a final decision.
Thanks, Brian.
Hey, Brian, this is Lauren.
Lauren. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this sounds super interesting. I am trying to, like, I am curious if there's any other example that folks are aware of where resource planning has incorporated this type of econometric modeling. I mean, I think it might be the first time I'm hearing of it, and I would encourage, like, I'm encouraged by the fact that you guys are willing to look at this and consider how to use this, use the Jedi model. I think it's yeah, look, really, it could yield some really interesting information. I think that could help inform how you guys develop the ISP. So just, yeah, encouraged by you guys taking this suggestion seriously and thinking about how you might be able to use it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Lauren. I appreciate it. And to your point, yeah, we're definitely open to if anybody else has any other models or sources that can help us better understand economic development based on the planning criteria, that'd be really helpful. So thank you for that, Lauren.
Thanks. Quinn, your hands up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. I have kind of two things. One, I know that the state of Wisconsin was looking at using kind of similar metrics for just their energy efficiency program, but perhaps that might be beneficial to PSE to kind of look at that and see how it could potentially be applied within this context. But leading me to my second point is that that is a statewide report, and I'm kind of curious as to like how PSE might geographically scope an economic development within the ISP. Will it be statewide or just limited to economic development within PSE service territory?
Oh, thank you for that question, Quinn. So you're asking, I think the root of that, are you asking how will we understand impacts are we thinking about impacts within our service territory, or are we thinking about it broadly, regardless of where resources may go? I think
Yeah.
that's the tough part. Now, the model does ask for a location, and so we would have to think about what location would we use based on our planning process and our assumptions. Um, I, I think that's tough to say whether or not the job specifically, and I'm just thinking about jobs, right? It's tough to
Yeah,
say
no
whether
worries.
the jobs or you could say tax revenue is going to go towards PSE territory, especially if we are building or the model is planning to build outside of the region, because the Jedi model is very location based. So you can give it a sense of, okay, well, it's a wind farm in Oregon. So what is that impact there, right? So it is more of a localized impact. And so I think we would look at it in totality than specific to PSC territory, just because the resources may not be here. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. It's just kind of a matter of how you would think about scoping it. Because yeah,
Yeah,
you could very easily get out over your skis and be like,
that's
well,
right.
economic development for the region is important, so we go there.
Hmm.
But I don't recommend you do that. But that's like a way to which you. So yeah, I think I'm just asking that deciding. I'm just excuse me. I think I'm just saying deciding on a scope is important.
Yes, yeah, completely agree. And I don't want to thank you for that reminder, Quinn, because I don't want to miss Wesley. You had a question about the who, so I'm going to come back to that later and try to remember to bring this up as we go through these. But thank you for that question, Quinn.
Great. And then we have, I think, one last question on this slide, Brian, before we transition to the next, I think. So, Callie.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of jumping off of the question of, geographical distribution, I think that's something that I would appreciate seeing PSE consider for a lot of these other metrics too. Like when we talk about like the societal cost of greenhouse gases or like the impact on frontline communities. Sometimes if your power plant is not in your service territory, are we considering that, building a different kind of plant can have less of a negative, health impact, air quality impact, or improve air quality somehow for like a community that might not be in your service territory? And that's a question I have been thinking about. So just encourage like considering it and maybe addressing it somehow or why you can't address it, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Callie. And I think it does go back to looking at things at the portfolio level and may not necessarily know the specific, we may or may not know the specific location. I think we've talked about that before, but I hear you. And if there are opportunities where we can look at the geographic distribution of these impacts, that would be helpful in this decision framework. Okay. Thank you for that.
Great.
Uh,
Okay. And Brian, just so you know, we're a little bit behind schedule.
oh, okay.
So I was going to say maybe if you feel like this has had a decent amount of discussion, we might want to move to the next slide.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Annie.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so the next one is reliability, resiliency, security of supply. We bundled this together because when we presented at the last RPAG, there was a lot of discussion about how we separate these things and talk about them individually. So again, this is going to be a open discussion on really getting ideas from the group here in different ways we could measure reliability, resiliency, and security of supply at the portfolio level. Now, our initial approach is to really think about reliability and resiliency in terms of, does it meet set standards, whether it's NERC standards, whether it's um, gas standards, whatever it may be. It's about, does the portfolio meet those standards, and being able to qualitatively state whether or not it meets it and what standard is there. The other thing I'll state is that last time we were in here, we had a recommendation on a ICE tool, and so we internally have started to look at that tool. So thank you to those who who raised that last time. So we've started to look at that tool to better understand how it could fit into this portfolio level view for reliability or resiliency. Dennis.
Yeah, this is just an extension kind of earlier conversations. But do you have a specific methodology to measure and prioritize risk within the ISP model regarding reliability, resiliency, and security of supply?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dennis. I would say that the model is set to make sure we serve all load and make sure we meet all the standards. And so I would say that the priority is to meet those standards to lower the risk of any of the any outages or things like that. And so, but Dennis, to your point, I know we talked about this before. I don't think we have the level of detail that you were thinking about in terms of a sensitivity around the risk or anything like that. But definitely open if you want to help us talk through or help us understand a specific risk that you're thinking of that maybe myself or others in the team can speak to.
Sure. This is kind of a model that we've used in the past for like a security threat matrix or emergency management risk matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And we would look, first of all, at the probability of risk, from 0 to 1, and also look at the probability of the severity of that incident again.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would look at those two, and that would be essentially the relative severity of the risk. But there's another there's two dimensions. There's kind of another dimension to this, and that is I would say the dependent variable sensitivity. So when these things happen, how many other dependent variables get triggered in the system, in the ISP system? And I guess I'm going to use the example of the pandemic, pre-pandemic. We looked at, for example, the probability of the risk of it happening, of a pandemic happening, and it was measured relatively, actually, kind of low, low to medium, and the severity was looked at, okay, kind of medium to high, but I don't think people really, I guess the system didn't really address how serious. The other one we're looking at is, again, the dependent variable sensitivity. How many additional variables will be triggered as a result of it? And I don't think that we really understood how sensitive that was. I mean, in retrospect, everybody realizes that the risk was more than low. The severity was really, for us, turned out to be catastrophic. And the dependent variable sensitivity is, there were so many variables that were triggered throughout the economy. It just expanded that significantly. So I guess what I'm looking at is, you pick something within, let's say, the supply chain, and say, how likely is this to happen? And then, when it happens, and essentially, I'm going to step back, looking at all of these possible things, that risks that can happen, and putting them out in a matrix, and looking at them and rating them, in probability of happening, and then also measuring the probability of the severity. So with something that is a high chance of happening and a high severity, obviously puts it at the top of the list, to be able to deal with it within the system. Something that is a low probability of happening and low severity, you would look at just, run it to failure, or have things. But it's prioritizing these things so that we know where to focus and put things in place within the system to be able to, to either avoid or mitigate, or, all the things we'd have to do to deal with it in the end. But the other one again is just it's it's critical in the sense of the number of variables that can be dependent variables that can be triggered within the system or outside the system that affects the system. So I'm just kind of looking at that as, and we've used those in the past, and they, if they're done really well, they point you in the right direction for dealing with certain things within the system. And I guess a big one, for example, would be, just in dealing with the data centers and how they could possibly change the cost of energy within a region with them competing for resources, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or some, catastrophic, natural event that could cause loss of access to certain types of clean energy east of the mountain, that kind of thing. But kind of leave it there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if, how you're pragmatically looking at all these different risks and how you're measuring them and how they're prioritized for action and, their follow-on actions within the system.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dennis. Thanks for walking us through that example, because that was going to be one of my questions, is sort of give an example. And I think data centers is a good example, but moreover, I think the process we're taking in using these scenarios where they sort of look at different possibilities, feasibilities, and so there's some inherent risk in each of those different buckets. But I hear what you're saying is that it's not just the risk itself and how likely, but also the severity of it and how can we capture that. So, Dennis, I think that's something we'll have to take back, and as we look at each of the cases and scenarios and think through, okay, what is a risk we should be looking at or could look at across these different cases, and how can we provide some sort of comparison between them. Yep. Thank you, Dennis. I saw a hand, but it might be gone.
I think it went down, and I did want to pause because there were
Sure.
a couple things I think PSE wanted to speak to verbally before we wrap up on this slide, if that's okay, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead.
Philip, I think over to you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, first of all, I'm really jealous of the name of the Jedi model, right? That's an awesome name. I wish I had come up with an idea of the Jedi model. That's awesome. But just wanted to mention something about the CCA and the ceiling prices. We are not really entertaining looking at higher ceiling prices because that's not required by any way in the CCA. The Department of Ecology is required to print to provide those allowances at the ceiling price. They don't count against this. I guess the Department of Ecology is not required to establish pricing in the CCA such that the state meets its target. It's just one of the policies that the state has implemented. There's nothing in the statute that requires it to be the only way that the state meets those targets, right? So it's not like a situation in California when they are required, if they create additional allowances, they're only borrowing them from the future. That's the way the law in California works. That is not what the law in Washington does. And I guess I'm assuming that they did that on purpose. And so part of the reason why it feels really important for the IRP, the ISP process here, I think we're perfectly, we totally agree that it makes sense to use the ceiling price for this analysis, because that might be what our customers have to pay, right? And if there's not enough allowances, it feels like it's probably going to be pretty high. Why not just assume the ceiling? But if you look at CETA and the CCA together, we need to be able to provide information to policymakers about what the policies that they've enacted, what are they going to achieve? Right? We're not going to necessarily achieve what somebody said we're going to achieve who passed the law. We're going to all now take this, we're going to study the heck out of it, and we're going to provide feedback to policymakers It's like, well, these are the policies that we have. They need to know if those policies aren't going to achieve their objectives, and they need to understand the cost implications of those. So that's kind of the reason why. But I'll tell you, Wesley, I was I for a while I thought the same thing. That, oh no, the ceiling price is just going to have to go up because they have to balance the carbon books. That's not true. That's not how the law in Washington was set up. So that's the reason why we're not so concerned that the ceiling price will go way up or anything like that. Then just on the sort of participant cost, non-participant cost test, it's just important to keep in mind as you're dealing at the there's a big difference between what you're doing at the ISP or IRP level versus what you're doing, say, at a program planning level, like a conservation program planning level. So like our modeling, we don't have the capability. Like Aurora doesn't spit out a participant cost, a non-participant cost, all this stuff as it goes through the optimization routine, right? It's looking to minimize your cost as you've defined it, right? Now, for things like in this ISP context, we've been planning on doing things like we can examine something big like building electrification. What will happen to participant costs? What will happen to non-participant costs? Right? We'll be able to do that kind of stuff. But that's not the kind of thing you can do for each individual conservation measure, right? You can do that at the program planning level because you're no longer asking all the questions, right? ISP, IRP, you're asking a huge number of questions. When you go into doing the actual program planning, you're now constraining the question that you're asking. You're saying, how do I, what's the right program mix to do this? And then it's a whole different framework that you're dealing with. So I just wanted to make sure that that's the reason why we're not really able to do that. We will be able to do it with some really big things like I think electrification, building electrification across the different scenarios. We'll be able to do that. But like for each individual conservation measure or something like I think the example was heat pumps. We're not that you wouldn't do that at the IRP, ISP level for each individual measure. So I hope that helps.
It does.
Thanks, Phil.
So,
Yeah. And Quinn, we are almost 15 minutes over on this section. Is there any chance we could do your question in the chat?
I was just gonna say that staff is glad that you're looking into the ICE 2.0 model.
Okay, great. Thank you.
oh, thanks, Gwen.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so Brian, I don't know if we can move into kind of the next slides and wrap on this section, but I know we're kind of behind, so.
Yeah, I can do the last one and wrap up here. Lauren, I see your
Yeah.
comment in the chat related to sort of applicable standards. We covered those in the last RPAG meeting. One of the slides had the specific standards we were looking at for the resiliency and reliability. But I hear your comment here on a comparative analysis and thinking through the contribution of all the resources here. Okay, so last slide here. So this actually goes to, I forget who had the question, but more about how these things get implemented and how these things get added into the full decision framework. And what we just want to illustrate here is all the conversations we've been having this month and the previous month about cost test elements, which are monetized, and then the quantitative and qualitative elements. Those all are part of the full decision framework body of work. And so while we don't have the specific details on how this will work with each different case, we really just want to show that visual of these are the bulk of the elements that we'll be considering and that will come together to help us move towards that preferred portfolio for the ISP. And so the lowest reasonable cost and public interest that is in the rules in the statute that the commissioners use to determine the preferred portfolio. And then there may be some other factors. The rules give flexibility and openness to use other factors as part of this preferred portfolio decision framework process to get towards a preferred portfolio. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. I think we heard a lot of good feedback here and a lot of things we need to go back and do a bit more research on. I see Wesley's hand is up.
Yeah, just a quick question. Can you speak more to what is in the what was in the prior slide for other something? I think other
Oh,
factors.
potential other factors.
Yeah, it was
There's
orange.
nothing there right now. I will say there's nothing there right now, but I think the point we're trying to make is that the rules allow for that flexibility if there are other factors that don't fit within the cost test, societal impacts, things like that. And so there may be other things that we want to consider that this group may consider, outside of what we saw, maybe there's something else that we want to measure, we want to study as part of the decision framework. So there's nothing there, but that was just leaving that space for there could be other things that aren't fully defined in the rules.
Okay, well, thanks, Brian, and thanks everyone for your questions. I'm sorry to hurry us along, but I know we have a whole nother topic and just an hour left. So, but thanks so much, Brian. Thanks, Karen, everybody else for answering questions and engaging. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move us into the next big topic for the next 45 minutes or so. Updated reference case regarding the demand forecast, and we've got Stephanie Price, Chandita Das, and Lauren Molander here to present on this topic. So feel free to take it from here.
All right, thanks, Annie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lauren Molander. I'm the manager of load forecasting and analysis. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so switching gears from the previous topic on to the demand forecast. We are here today for a couple of topics within the demand forecast. And one is that we were presenting to the RPAG last July 2025, about the base case or reference case demand forecast results. And if you recall, things are very uncertain, as they still are, frankly. A lot changed through the summer. So just after we put pencils down on our forecast, things were still happening in the economy. EV policies were changed. For example, the Big Beautiful Bill was passed on 4th of July. And things changed with EV policy that way. So we watched some things change along the way from our original assumptions. There were some trends that were concerning, and ultimately what we decided to do was go ahead and do an update of our base case or reference case demand forecast. We don't typically do that. It kind of sets off a lot of dominoes and some extra work, but we did think that things were changing enough that it was warranted. So we're here today to walk through what exactly changed and what those results are. The second topic under the demand forecast is that we heard in previous RPAGs that the RPAG was interested in hearing about some of the more specific assumptions for the ISP load scenarios. If you recall, there's building electrification, large loads, and EV assumptions that all go into those scenarios, the scenario S1 through S4. We don't have building electrification done yet, so we can't bring that, but we can bring you our assumptions around large loads and electric vehicles. So we thought we'd show you what we're doing with that. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so first slide here, this is literally the slide of key assumptions that we presented and talked at length about last July. If you recall, just kind of boiled down building electrification, customer growth, transportation electrification, conservation measures, demand side resources, climate change, and large load additions. Those are just some really major parts of our forecast. And as I mentioned, EV policy really changed. The other component part of the forecast that we were following was just what was going on with the economic outlook. And that between those two things, plus some changes and trends in our actual data coming in, because as we were watching actual data, we were pretty much at the point where we had maybe 6 or 7 more months of actuals. We decided to go ahead and update. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about those updates specifically. So in July of 2025, we had some customer growth expectations, and very specifically, I wanted to mention about the gas side. There's a lot of uncertainty on gas customer growth, just given policies. The PSE margin allowance declined and was ultimately at zero over time over the last few years. HB 1589 came in, the state building codes are getting more and more strict. And when we first produced the demand forecast that we showed you last summer, we were still seeing very modest positive growth on the gas side. So that's what we stuck with for our forecast. But as we went through the summer and the economic outlook, just in the near term, had kind of taken a more pessimistic viewpoint, we just felt that it was time to take another look at that. And we actually went from a very modest positive growth to flat growth. In fact, it was, and this is again on the gas side, we had slightly positive residential growth, and we went to flat residential growth and actually slightly negative growth on the commercial gas side. So that's a big change, even though these are all modest directions that we had in the first place. It's just from a optics point, it is a big change going from slightly positive to flat, or even in subclasses are negative. The other thing on the electric side is, again, with the economic outlook just looking less, things were more uncertain. If you recall the headlines, really, everything in the headlines throughout the summer and the fall, tariffs were being either threatened or put into place. Construction costs would get more costly. The housing permit forecast was looking like it was going down, trending down from what we had originally seen. So on the electric side, we did also temper electric growth as well. Now on the EV side, so transportation electrification, again, this is the second big thing that we took a look at and changed. So the big beautiful bill was signed and put into place July 4th of 2025, and in that ended the federal tax credits for electric vehicles early. I think they were supposed to be in place until like 2031, 2032. Instead, they ended early in September of last year. So that was a big impact to our assumptions on adoption. The state also softened some policy on enforcing penalties. There were some penalties that were supposed to start in 2026 if car manufacturers didn't meet certain targets in Washington state for medium and heavy duty vehicles, as well as light duty vehicles. We had a mixture of what policy would be met and what policy wouldn't be met in our original forecast. And this time for the update, we went with neither of those policies would be met. So what that did effectively was reduce the adoption of EVs, the outlook for adoption of EVs, and of course the load associated with that. So those are like the big components that we changed. We put the results of the electric side and the gas side in the appendix. You'll see the impact to customer growth. You'll see the impact to load, which is energy, and to peaks. And then we've also put in an update stack chart of how just what the component parts of the forecast are with the update. And all of the movement from our updates that we made essentially just lowered each of those pieces of the forecast. So rather than flip through lines on charts, we thought that we'd put those in the appendix and then, of course, entertain any questions, and answer any questions that you might have today on those. So I'm going to pause there because the next section is actually ISP load scenarios, and want to see if there's any questions or comments about just the update. Again, this is all reference case updates.
Nothing so far, Lauren.
Okay.
But yeah.
We'll keep going then.
And folks, feel free to put it in the chat if you do.
Great. Next slide, please. And we can go on to the next slide. So switching gears here, now we're talking about the load scenarios, the ISP scenarios. And this is the table that Jennifer Colson flashes up almost every RPAG about what each of the scenarios entails. I grayed out the building electrification and customer programs piece of the table because those are not yet done. They're still being worked on and assembled, but we do have assumptions around large load requests for these scenarios, as well as the EV adoption for the scenarios. And this is color coded, just hopefully to make it visually easier, but basically what we're trying to convey here is that the reference case, scenario 1 and scenario 2, they all have the same assumptions for large load requests. And they all have the same assumptions for the EV adoption. And that is they're essentially the reference case. So large load requests, this is where it gets a little tricky. Sometimes we use words that are a little counterintuitive, but essentially we are assuming for reference case, we need to have a very high level of certainty in order to put in a large load as like a discrete adder into the forecast. So that in turn is a lower load assumption around large loads. And I should mention large loads, I'm kind of using that as an umbrella term, but this is where data centers would fall into the forecast. So for the reference case, like I said, and for scenarios 1 and 2, very certain assumptions around what is actually going to become a customer. And that's what's in the reference case. Now for scenarios 3 and 4, where we're testing higher loads, essentially the idea is, well, let's relax that certainty around what we're going to assume for data centers. Let's assume that more data centers are going to come online and see what happens to load. And so we have a method for how we came up with that particular assumption, and Stephanie will go through that here in a second. Okay, so on the EV side, the reference case for EVs is used for S1 through S3, same assumptions. And with that, I should mention, so this kind of actually relates to the demand forecast, the reference case that we were just talking to. We were able to lower that adoption forecast in the load part of EVs because we actually had a low scenario for EVs already on hand. If you recall, Guidehouse is the provider of our electric vehicle forecast. And with that, they produced a high and a low for us. And so in our original demand forecast, we had the reference case for that included. But with the change in policies, we were compelled to actually swap that out for low. So the reference case scenario 1 and 2 are now the low EV forecast. On the flip side, for the higher load scenarios for S3 and S4, we have the high. So not just going back up to the mid, but we're actually using what high adoption would look like for EVs. So that's setting the stage for what we're using. Again, it's really a combination of just two different things. One for the first 3 scenarios on the table, and then S3 and S4 for the other set of assumptions. I think that is everything that I wanted to say on this slide. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Price. She's going to walk you through the specifics of the assumptions for large loads in EVs.
Okay. So here we have our assumptions for scenarios of a higher large load growth. On the chart below, we have 2 forecasts. The purple line at the bottom is the average megawatts assumed in the reference case, mid and mid plus. These are what we add to our large customer forecast to account for expected load growth not captured by trend in our models. These are mainly large transportation infrastructure projects, but also large customer growth and some data center expansion. The teal line is a scenario of potential larger load growth. It is the reference forecast plus an assumption of moderate data center growth in the near and the long term. This forecast is built on metrics sourced from EPRI. The specific report is cited on the right. And it mainly correlates estimates of Washington State's current and expected data center energy consumption, and then adjust it to what PSE's share would be. So this moderate growth estimate is roughly equivalent to 20 average megawatts of new data center load per year over the next 25 years. So we are not adding thousands of megawatts for this particular scenario. We are taking a moderate growth assumption sourced from EPRI. I see a raised hand.
Yes, I was just going to call on Quinn. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Stephanie. So I'm hearing you. So you're basically saying like you project an average amount of like 20 megawatts of data center growth per year, but given kind of the nature of data centers, my impression is that they don't kind of come online 20 megawatts at a time. Uh, so is it kind of worth it to smooth data center growth out versus try to predict maybe where you might see data center growth at one time and build that in versus like a more linear model?
So this actually isn't linear. Um, if you can see from the line, it actually is a bit convex. So I said on average 20 megawatts. It actually starts out a little bit lower and then it grows over time. But generally, this number is actually I feel like really consistent with reality. So, but yeah, I think you're right that we do expect things to ramp up over time. But then I've thought about this and I recall that the purpose of the scenarios is to kind of like bookend what would larger load look like if we really wanted to test our portfolio. So getting the specific ramp rates for individual projects or additions over time is really a fine detail, I think, in comparison to what we're attempting to do with these larger load scenarios.
Thanks. And I don't see any other questions in the chat or hands up. Let me know if you have one. Okay. We probably can keep going.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so next we have assumptions on higher EV load growth, as well as our previous July 2025 forecasts and our current update. The charts below are for average megawatts on the left-hand side and potential peak megawatt impacts on the right-hand side. The light teal line is assumption for higher EV load growth. The scenario assumptions are detailed on the next slide, but they mainly boil down to more adoption incentives, meeting state regulatory rules, and higher average usage. Stepping down, the darker teal line is the former EV reference case forecast, and then the purple line is the current EV reference case forecast. As Lauren discussed before, we have moved from the dark teal line to the purple line for our reference case assumption due to all the different federal policy changes, as well as expectations around state targets.
Yes, I see your hand up, Quinn.
I'm back again. So I'm kind of curious if managed or actively managed charging, to what extent that factors into these load growth assumptions, or would that be more an issue for peak load in your estimation?
Okay, so what we've shown here is before demand side resources. So the managed charging would come in two different ways. There is the time of use rates that PSE customers can participate on, which really pay off if you have an EV, as well as EV event-based demand response. So for managed charging here, we contract with CADMAS through the Conservation Potential Assessment for them to provide us expectations on program participation and impacts based on the various use cases and a vehicle infrastructure. So we rely on CADMAS to provide us estimates on managed charging. And if your question is about how does this change, how do our assumptions change from going between the teal line and the purple line for our assumptions about managed charging in the ISP? For the reference case, we have not updated our managed charging assumption for the new low. However, when looking proportionally at the impacts from managed charging between the old base and the new base, they do not, it is not such that we would have negative EV peak impact. The participation rates in managed charging are not astronomical in comparison to the load forecasted. Does that cover your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't see other questions, so I think it's okay to keep moving.
All right, well, with that, I'm done.
Okay.
Oh, okay, we should go to the next slide. The next slide is the details of the EV scenarios. So Guidehouse developed for us a low base and high EV forecast. We were previously on the base for the reference case. We moved to the low. The high scenarios are assumed for scenarios 3 and 4.
And I see hands up. Yes, Wesley.
Thank you. Guess I'll go first. So I guess, I think everyone's probably seen fuel prices of late. I'm wondering if those are factored into these averages for the low and base scenario, and as well as what the timeframes for those averages are. Fuel prices are quite high, and I wonder if that might not incentivize more EV adoption than what PSC is now adjusting their assumptions for. Yeah.
So this forecast that we are including was developed prior to the geopolitical stuff that has been going on, and the low scenario, as we have on here, I think that it does have a note about fuel prices. So yes, so we have AAA average base price assumption adjusted for inflation. So this is as of last year. Now, I think that would point to, okay, so maybe the fuel price forecast in the low scenario might be low. That said, the Guidehouse's models are detailed in the reports that we have posted from them. They came and they talked in July. Their model is based on total cost of ownership, and then adoption of vehicles is based on that, plus a mass diffusion model. So yes, fuel prices would influence the total cost of ownership and influence people to potentially adopt EVs faster. That said, in terms of volumes, I would need to defer to the modelers themselves on how much of an impact incrementally. We did reach out to Guidehouse just to kind of like check with them and see what their opinion was on this. And generally, I think the response was it is a factor, but it is not a in the short term, there are other movers that could influence adoption a lot more, like incentives or awareness and things like that. So when I say incentives, I mean like the federal policy tax credits that went away, or just stuff like that. So I'm going to defer if any of my fellow EV forecasters would like to jump in on this issue, feel free.
You got it, Stephanie.
Okay.
Annie, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you, Quinn. We're just going to go to a couple of the hands up. So Eliza and then Quinn.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm actually here at PSE sitting in Philip's office, so that's why you see Philip talking.
Like the old days.
Like the very old days, very old days. I'm here in town, and we're sending him off. But anyways, what I wanted to bring up was, we're getting ready at PNUC to publish the Northwest Regional Forecast. We've been putting it together. And while not today, but I think at a future RPAG meeting, if everyone's interested, I'd like to offer to walk through that forecast. It would help put PSE's forecast in context with the region. It will talk about the trends we've been seeing. And I think it's just I would like to hear, get that discussion going. I think it's valuable for all of us to have that discussion together and think about the future, and how we work through these challenging times. So I'd like to make that offer.
Stephanie, anything on that or?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't know that I was the person to say.
Oh, no, I mean,
yeah.
whoever. Yes, I just saw your face first.
How about let me respond to that one.
Okay, great. Thanks,
I'd
Phil.
say thank you, Elisa. That's a great idea. And we'll get back to you and figure out when we can work that in, if we can work it into the process. On the other hand, if folks would, it would be great for you all, for you RPAG members, to let us know, is that something you'd like to see? Because if not, we don't have to spend your time on it. So let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. And thank you, Elisa, for the offer.
Thank you. Yeah, and I see Quinn's hand up next.
Well, that's a very fun offer, and I before I get to my question and comment, I will say that the commission is also starting up some EV related things that we'll have some announcements on relatively soon, and we'll have a new EVSE policy statement at some point. So that's a lot of fun work that is probably that yeah, we at the commission would definitely like to collaborate on. But that being said, obviously we don't have Guidehouse in front of us here, so I'll try to keep my questions that I think Guidehouse can answer to a minimum. But I'm curious to one, what like how much uh this forecast built in like the MSRP for used vehicles. I know that used EVs are starting to approach parity with ICE vehicles. So that was one thing I was kind of thinking about And I had another thing, and I'll let you answer that while I remember it.
I think that's one that we would need to take to Guidehouse. And so we can take that for the feedback form.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think, Quinn, did you have a follow-up? You're on mute. Sorry.
I just can't remember what the second thing was. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, other questions or thoughts on this topic before we keep moving along? Okay. So thank you so much, Stephanie and team. And I think that wraps your section, if I'm correct. So and it looks like we've gotten to all the questions on topic. I see that we do have a little bit of extra time. Do we, I know there were maybe some questions that we might want to circle back on, or maybe go back to the cost test graphic. Who should I lean on to make that call, or should we just go ahead and move into next steps in public comment?
Now, Annie, since we do have some time,
Okay.
let's go ahead and move back a few slides to the colorful cost test. I don't know which number it is, but I think you know which one I'm talking
17,
about.
I think. Yeah.
And see if there's further conversation, questions that we can have there, since we have the luxury of a bit more time.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I think we've got about another 10 minutes.
Let's go back just a little bit further. I'm thinking about the elements one, but we might also want to spend some time on the decision framework. We'll see where the hands and the conversation goes.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks. Yeah, Wesley.
Thank you. I was doing my part to help keep us on time and was saving this question, but I'm happy that we have some extra time. So,
yeah, thank you.
So related to the economic development and the JEDI model, I'm curious how it connects to the AG's desire to see economic development in named communities and workforce development. I'm wondering how I guess first, as the JEDI model, do you see it supporting that analysis, or are those going to be like two separate tracks of analysis? And perhaps the JEDI model helps give you, specific economic development analysis and quantitative data, and then more qualitative data would help, answer the question of how the benefits would accrue in named communities.
Yeah, thanks for that, Wesley. I think what we're seeing is in the JEDI model, because we can't be as granular with the location of the resource, we can't be as granular in the ISP. And so we're not able to really distill the sort of named communities impact necessarily. But what I will say is, and we talked about this a number of RPAGs ago, is that the sort of understanding and evaluation of impacts to named communities doesn't just stop in this RPAG ISP process. We will continue to understand as we go through the acquisition process, as well as we go through, we have an RFP process and things like that. And so we will better understand as we get those details in the model. And so I think once we do that type of analysis later on, that's when that work stream of understanding impacts in named communities will be able to come to be raised to the top, so that we can really see that later on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wesley.
Okay, and then I see two more hands up. We've got Megan up and then Lauren after that. Megan.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak a bit to how the risk reduction premium will be weighted in the cost test, especially compared with the ceiling price of CCA allowances. And then in general, if you could speak a bit to how these different impacts will be weighted. Is this something we're going to figure, or we're going to find out in a later RPAG meeting? Just digging a bit more past this big picture.
Yes. Oh, Gary, you're on mute.
You go ahead, Brian, and I'll follow you.
Oh, okay.
I can't even work my mute button, so
it's
go
all
for
right.
it.
Thanks for that question, Meg. I think right now, I mentioned this before, is we're really trying to understand the elements at this point. I don't know that we have an indication of weighting or what we would weight on any of these elements at this point. The rules don't really indicate any direction as it relates to weighting, and so we're really just trying to um, understand what the elements are going to be, and then understand how we can comparatively see that across the different scenarios. So, and I know we've had a lot of conversation. I've heard a number of people talk about waiting, and so that's just one thing that we're not quite sure yet about the process here. But Megan, I am curious if I can ask you a question. Um, what are your thoughts on waiting? Because you're not the first person to bring this up, and so how do you see waiting being, if you see it being critical or not critical to this decision framework and decision process?
Yeah, thanks for turning the question back. I think I'll have to think a bit more and maybe submit some comments later on. But
Yeah.
initially, I think the monetized and quantified elements, I mean, if there's a dollar amount assigned to all the monetized impacts, those are pretty easy to weigh against each other. I think it's harder with the qualitative impacts. So I also don't have an answer, but we'll definitely be engaged later on and submit some comments.
Yeah, that's okay. And that's exactly sort of the scenario we were talking through earlier. Is like, okay, we got some monetized elements and those seem a little more straightforward, but you're right. How do you bring in these qualitative elements? And that's the piece we want to continue to have discussion on. So looking forward to those comments, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kara, did you want to add anything? Sorry.
No, I think you covered it well. And Megan, to your comment about CCA, just noting that we will have a sensitivity that looks at the mid price rather than the ceiling price, so we'll be able to evaluate that as we get to sensitivity work to see what the difference is.
Thanks, Kara.
Yeah.
Lauren, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was trying to figure out kind of where I might be able to contribute further on here. I do feel like on the health and safety side, there have been some efforts. Like I believe there was like a Stanford University study, maybe Columbia. I don't know. I can dig some of that stuff up for you guys on looking at um, the health benefits associated with the reduction of indoor air pollution and like switching from cooking with gas to cooking with electric. And I think I don't know if it would rise to the level of something that we could turn green on here, but we might be able to at least quantify it in some way. So if you're open to it, I'd like to share those resources with you guys and with the RPAG members, and folks can kind of think about that. That's not my area of expertise, but I think we could probably find some experts on that. And then I think the other thing, um, yeah, safety. I don't know. I'll have to think more about safety, but to me, like the indoor air quality is one where there has been some work that we could possibly leverage for this process.
Thanks, Lauren.
I see Quinn's hand up.
Yeah, this is something that we've been kind of chewing on as staff, but it'll per usual give my caveat that staff's position is staff's position and not the commission's position. Uh, which is to say that we've been kind of thinking about, based on last meeting, how some of the metrics, especially around like health and safety, were just qualified as like, well, if this portfolio meets this thing, then it's probably good. And I think I'd encourage you all to kind of start to go a little bit beyond that and say, well, if this portfolio meets these standards, what does that like what happens next? Like how do we continue on from there and like really start to look at like what the impact of actually meeting standards ends up being. And maybe as a way to get more towards, like Lauren said, like turning purple squares blue. And yeah, staff is, as always, happy to, as we find it, pull research and pass that on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Quinn. Please do.
Yep.
Okay. See a couple things in the chat. And yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lauren. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't see questions in there, but yeah, thanks, Froylan and Lauren, for that. I did want to just pause to see if, I know we haven't heard from quite a few folks today, just if there's anything you want to add to this conversation before we move into wrap up. And I do see your hand up, Wesley, just one moment. Just, I know we haven't heard from Donald, Fred, Froylan, John, JP, Katie, Kelly, or Sommer. So just wanted to create some space there. If you do want to speak up, feel free. I'll go to Wesley and then just pause to see if there's anyone else. Wesley.
Yeah, thank you. I can be really quick. It's not really a question, just piggybacking off of both Lauren and Quinn. I know that the EPA has done a lot of work towards, quantifying and monetizing health and safety, and there are two tools that they have, which is the Cobra tool and the BenMap tool. I see your head nod, Brian. So, assume you've looked at those, but I just wanted to vocalize that those are out there and encourage you to look at those and whether or not they're used. Well, if they're not used, I'd be interested in knowing what hurdles you face in using them. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Wesley. Cobra tool, very familiar. It's been a few years since we looked at it, but what was the other tool? Did you say VinMap?
Yeah, BenMap, and I know we should avoid acronyms. It stands for Environmental Benefits Mapping and Analysis Program.
Okay.
I'll just link to it right now.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Anyone else that we haven't heard from? We still have a few more minutes, so just want to give you some space if you have anything to add to the conversation or questions. I always feel kind of silly rushing us along and then us having extra time. So my bad on that, but thank you for being patient. The facilitator in me finds it hard to make sure we're on time, but also give enough time for everything. Oh, Lauren, did you have your hand up for one more thing?
Well, I just had a question about kind of the plan. Like, so when are we gonna start looking at like some of the delivery system pieces of this?
Yeah, Lauren, I'm wondering if someone from my resource planning team with the timeline handy might be able to speak to that. We have talked about delivery system planning a couple of times now in this ISP process. So it might be when we get closer to results, but I'll just pause and see if Elizabeth or Jen can chime in on that.
Yeah. Hi, Lauren. It's Jennifer Colson. In regards to your question, are you referring specifically to the cost test, or are you talking more about like results and outputs?
Yeah, like results and outputs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so in May we have the reference case RPAG meeting, and so that'll be all encompassing for all of the outputs across the ISP. And so you'll see that going forward as we talk about scenario results as well and sensitivities. Like the idea is the same. It's all of the ISP in one conversation.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize. I know you guys feel like you're keeping us in the loop. It's just there's so many other things going on too. So I'm just trying to remind myself, oh yeah, where are we at here? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, I can imagine it's quite hectic.
Okay, I'll give one more pause to see if there's anyone else. And while I'm doing that, I'll just make a call to the public participants too, if you've been listening in and still hanging with us. I see there's still 6 people left. Thanks for hanging out with us for a couple hours. If you are planning on having something to share with the group today in the form of a public comment, Ben will go ahead and make sure you can raise your hand. So please go ahead and use that raise hand feature. I believe you'll have to click on the react arrow and then, or sorry, click on the react heart that you'll see and then click raise hand to be able to do that. So Ben, if you can enable that function for folks, and I'll just pause one more time for RPAG members. Any last questions or comments? Okay. Well, great. Glad we had a little extra time to further the conversation on this. And thanks, Karen and Brian, for coming back, circling back on the topic. I think we can move to the end of the deck, Jack, if you want to go down to, let's see, slide number. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and Ben, I don't know if you were able to put the hand raise function up and if anyone raised their hand for public comment today.
It's on. I haven't seen any good public commenters though.
Okay, great. I just don't want to cut anybody off, but so please feel free to raise your hand in the next 30 seconds or so. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and move into next steps and wrap up and not go over the public comment stuff. So I'll go ahead and just transition us into that next steps and close out. And then Ben, please just interrupt me if you see a hand get raised. Next slide. Okay, so at the end of each of these meetings, we like to just remind people the feedback process that is that they go or that PSE goes through for each of these meetings 1 week prior, 3 to 5 business days before, the day of the meeting, 1 week after, and 4 weeks post meeting. So the feedback window for upcoming meetings starts that 1 week before. We get the materials out 3 to 5 business days before, and then 1 week after the meeting, the feedback meeting or the feedback loop closes, and 4 weeks after they post the summary. So hoping that you all have seen this and are recognizing it as a familiar graphic at this point. And if you ever have questions about it, let us or PSE know. Next slide. PSE also has a great website up. I'm sure all the RPAG members are aware of this, but if you're a public attendee and first time here, we've got all the meetings recorded. They are also live streamed for folks if that's an easier way to access them. And you click on each date tile and you can get all the materials and recordings. Next slide. Upcoming activities. So we don't have an RPAG meeting scheduled for April, but we do want to just note that the feedback form will close for today's meeting next week on the 2nd. And then the next RPAG meeting, since we're skipping April, will be at the end of May on May 28th, I think a couple days after Memorial Day weekend. Next slide. And then if you have any last questions, comments, feedback, there's multiple ways to get your information over to PSE. We've got the ISP email, we have the feedback form, we have a voicemail if that works best for you. There's a subscribe email list, and of course the website that we just mentioned. Next slide. And Ben, doesn't look like we have any commenters. So I think I'm just going to confirm that with you real quick.
Yeah, no one has their hand up.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks so much for the public attendees listening in and for all the PSC presenters and all the RPAG members today. Just want to thank you all, of course, for being here yet again. PSC will follow up with meeting materials. And please do take a moment to complete the Zoom poll when you exit the meeting. We would love to get some feedback on how these are going for you. Before we close out and say goodbye to the RPAG until May, hopefully you guys all have a wonderful spring break if you have one planned. I know Kara is going to do a quick thank you and close out for today. So Kara, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. So just wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here today. All of your thoughts and input is really appreciated. You've given us a lot to think about on some of these elements for the cost test and some resources to look at further. So thank you, and we'll see you in May for our next meaty conversation around the reference case and the results. So thanks very much, and we'll see you then.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Enjoy your retirement, Philip.